Get voting now on our first poll of the evening because we want it to be a bumper poll. Should Assange be extradited to the USA? A, yes. B, no. You can vote on my Twitter feed, on my YouTube channel. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel. I'm on 199,000 subscribers. I'm beginning to think YouTube don't want me to get to the coveted 200,000. Prove me wrong. Subscribe right now to my YouTube channel. Let's do it before the end of the evening. And you can also vote on my Telegram channel. That's t.me/George Galloway. And please throw your lot in with our fighting fund to bring back first the podcast, second the midweek mother of all talk shows. Zugski already donated £5. Thanks for that, Zuk. Says, good evening, George. Pleasure to be here. And a pleasure for me to be talking with you, Zuk. And Ash Urbanipal gave $1.99 and says, I accidentally hit yes on the poll. Well, we'll discount you. And Dino Pantalaukas gives $9.99, my weekly contribution. Solidarity from New York. Thank you so very much. You can donate on the super chat function on the YouTube. I'm pausing momentarily because some extraordinary breaking news. Macron fails to win outright majority in the French National Assembly elections. Vive Mélenchon! Vive la France, vive la République, down with the little Napoleon. Assembly elections projections show Macron has failed to win an outright majority. That's cut him down to size. Oh wait, he's only 4'11", as we say in imperial measures. That's in his Cuban heels. Anyone remember Cuban heels? Let me get started. It was as characters as diverse as the right-wing English columnist Peter Hitchens and the left-wing Scottish nationalist Craig Murray, the former British ambassador who will be on the show this evening. A dark day, they said, in British history. A dark day, potentially a death knell to free journalism, investigative journalism, which scarcely still exists, and insofar as it has disappeared, has made a major contribution to the parlous circumstances in which we, in our countries in the so-called West, find ourselves in. I say so-called because many of us in the West don't agree with the regimes that have taken us here. Australia isn't in the West, but thinks that it is because of the way that it dresses. And, of course, the definition, self-definition of West, even if taken at its largest, constitutes not 15% of all the people in the world and far less than 50% of all the wealth in the world. The dark day they referred to was Priti Patel, the British Pontius Pilate, who washed her hands of her opportunity to enter history as the person that said, up with this we will not put. We will not prostitute ourselves completely to the United States of America. We will not go quietly into the good night that any regime in the world, if it's powerful enough, think one day Saudi Arabia, or if you're otherwise inclined, think one day China, one day ordering the British to deport to them someone who has offended, annoyed, transgressed against them, even if it is on an explicitly political basis. So, to continue my unlikely metaphor, if in 10 or 20 years from now, Britain is entirely beholden to the Chinese finance and industrial capital, increasing stranglehold on the economies, and China tells us that Peter Hitchens must be sent to them because he has trespassed against them, this week made it much more likely that British courts and British ministers will cry uncle and send even their own compatriots, and in this case of Julian Assange, an Australian citizen who never committed any offence in Britain, who never committed any offence in the United States. He was never in the United States. The person who committed the offence in connection with which he is charged has already been punished, Chelsea Manning, and sent to prison. They had the right to prosecute her. Whether they were right to do so is an entirely different matter, but they did, and they convicted, and they imprisoned her. Julian Assange was the recipient of truthful information revealing war crimes committed by the United States and Great Britain. Moreover, Julian Assange published all of that material simultaneously in some of the great media houses of the world. So how come The Guardian isn't facing extradition? How come German papers, Italian papers, Spanish papers, American papers are not facing prosecution for the publication of truthful material which was in the public interest to publish? And there was massively of interest to the public, as well as being in their interest to know crimes that were being committed in their name. The criminals have made it an offence to report on their crimes. That's what's happened. And Julian Assange's crucifixion now, well over a decade long, first in the Ecuador embassy and for the last nearly 4 years in the maximum security dungeon, Britain's Guantanamo Bay of Belmarsh prison, most of it, 3 years of it, as an untried prisoner who has no need to be behind bars, could be at home under house arrest, could be on an electronic tag, but is instead in a dungeon with some of the worst criminals known to humanity in Belmarsh. But those criminals are nothing compared to the criminals that want to get their hands on Julian Assange, like Mike Pompeo, the man who planned to kidnap or even murder Julian Assange, an Australian citizen with British residency, on the streets of London outside Harrods. He's the criminal. He's the one that planned an international crime of brigandry and piracy, and in his own hand, in his own documents. And he's demanding the prosecution of the 20 sources of the story that revealed his perfidy to Yahoo News, not the Revolutionary Workers' Gazette. No, Yahoo News revealed it. And Pompeo has been summoned to appear at a court in Spain to explain his role in the bugging, not just of Julian Assange and those of us who visited him in the Ecuador embassy, but the bugging of Julian Assange's lawyers, an offence which would get any charge in any other jurisdiction thrown out post haste. The American government under Mike Pompeo was studying closely all of the secret legal argumentation of the legal team of the man Pompeo was prepared to kidnap and murder. We'll be exploring what happens next and the depths of depravity revealed so far in this case with the Honourable Craig Murray, former British ambassador, historian and human rights activist, momentarily. And we'll be talking about Sri Lanka, where yesterday troops opened fire on people rioting outside a petrol station because the rationed petrol ran out. People across Sri Lanka, 80% of them, are now skipping meals for they cannot afford to eat. Sri Lanka has defaulted on its $51 billion debt and is in negotiation with the tender hearts of the International Monetary Fund. The country is sliding into chaos and anarchy as prices rise, as shortages multiply, and as poverty increases so fast that no one can quite believe that it's happening. And it is all connected to the events in Europe between NATO and the Russian Federation being fought out over the corpses and the ruins of the Ukraine, to which I shall turn now. The new head of the British Army said today that our soldiers must prepare themselves to fight Russia in Europe in World War III. Let me dissect that statement. Let me park, first of all, the true fact that there are more black cabs on the streets of London than there are soldiers in the British Army. That the entire British Armed Forces could fit inside Ibrox Park or Villa Park. No need to go to Wembley or to Old Trafford, where they would be frankly lost in a sea of empty seats. Leave aside the fact that the British government, successive British governments, have been cutting our defence budget year after year after year, and that our poor bloody infantry are still under-equipped, ill-clad, ill-paid, ill-housed, and ill-motivated, I suspect, to fight World War III against Russia. Because these are the people who'd have to do the fighting. Not the brass, metaphorically, in the chateau many, many miles behind the lines, like the new head of the British Army, certainly not like the politicians who will be deep in a nuclear bunker with their families, whilst you and your family will be waiting it's only for 5 minutes or so, for the incoming hypersonic, intercontinental, Russian ballistic missiles that will turn the entire island of Britain into ash. And, if we're lucky, including the nuclear bunkers in which the leaders that brought it upon us are sheltering, cowering like rats underground. Leave aside all of that. Does anyone remember the history of 1914? Does anyone remember the road to Sarajevo? Does anyone remember that the more you talk like this, the more you act like this, the more you prepare for this, the more certain it is that it's going to happen? And yet, here we have the Daily Express, which to my astonishment is still coming out, saying today that we must prepare to win World War III in Europe against Russia. Well, what does that mean, Mr. Beaverbrook and his descendants? How do you win a nuclear war? They incinerate you, and you incinerate them by definition. Nobody can win a nuclear war. That's why it was called MAD, mutually assured destruction. That's what we were told. Kept the peace throughout the Cold War. The certainty of MAD, of mutually assured destruction. Well, it appears we now have a generation of teenage scribblers in the newsrooms, teenage ministers and shadow ministers, and teenage top brass in the military who imagine that they can win a war with Russia. That can only mean that they have taken the banishment of the other side of the story in the Ukraine war literally. That can only mean that they actually refuse to watch, however difficult it is to find, the facts on the ground in Ukraine and prefer instead to believe the press releases issued by their own departments. Because if they watched what I watch on ASB Military, on Telegram, 100 times a day, they would see that the Ukrainian forces are being utterly destroyed on the battlefield, that Russia is on its way to taking not just half the country, but the entire Black Sea coast, leaving a rump Ukraine landlocked, and a land bridge at the end of that seaboard, bringing Transnistria, the breakaway province of Moldova, where today tens of thousands are demonstrating against the Western satrap that rules them. Moldova, Transnistria, the entire Black Sea coast, the entirety of the east of Ukraine. Well, if that's victory, then God knows what defeat will taste like. Yet still they throw scores of billions of dollars and euros and pounds into the pit of forlorn, abject defeat. Talk about reinforcing failure. These people are reinforcing disaster. Talk about throwing good money after bad. They're throwing good and bad Ukrainians into the death pit of this war that never needed to be fought. Just a pen is all that Zelensky required. His signature on a piece of paper that said, "We will never join NATO. We will be a neutral country, and we will honor the Minsk I and Minsk II agreements." And this war need never have happened. And all of the economic disaster in the sanctioning countries, not in the countries being sanctioned, would have been avoided. France is now cut off from the Russian grid. Germany began today to ration fuel for its people. And it's a long way to winter, about another 15 weeks before we'll have to turn the heating back on again.